Hey guys, welcome back to the Selling Sanity podcast. I am your hostess, Theresa Concepcion Esquire, for those who don't know. I am a retired litigator. I practiced law for about 16 years. I am now a consultant to law firms, so I consult firms on how to do trials and things like that, and I also coach attorneys one-on-one. The thing I also do is I break down Selling Sunset. And if you haven't heard the podcast before, just know that I have been following them for several years now on Instagram. The cast has always been very, very active on that platform. They've had lives, they do Ask Me Anythings, they respond to fan questions in the comments. They'll put links in their stories to different podcast interviews that they're doing. So if you ever want to interact with the cast, you have a much better shot at getting responses from them over on the Instagram platform. But I moved over to TikTok at the end of September, thinking, I wanted to, try a different platform because on Instagram I had about 500 followers, maybe 400 of them were fake. So just a couple friends and family on Instagram. And I actually went quote unquote viral on a topic that was different from Selling Sunset. I saw the interview that Jennifer Lopez did on Howard Stern. And at one point in the interview, he asks her if she's ever been loved, and she said no. And I was so infuriated by that response as somebody who has invested a lot of money in, their own mental health. I have come to have a really strong understanding of boundaries. And from the information that Jennifer Lopez puts into the public sphere, which is quite a lot, including her documentary, The Greatest Love Story Never Told, it's pretty easy to see from a healthy person's perspective that the issue isn't that Jennifer Lopez is, you know, has never been loved before, but it's more that Jennifer Lopez has a problem understanding and respecting boundaries. So I did a video, kind of sending that message of support to Ben Affleck. Never really anticipated that it would reach him, but it wound up reaching about 600,000 folks who looked at it. And that was when I realized that TikTok is a very different platform from Instagram. And your messages have broader reach. So I started doing different videos, and Selling Sunset has been a show that I followed. It's a show that after Christine Quinn left, I feel like it started to deteriorate because Christine left this gap of, who was going to be the bad girl in the office. And everyone seemed to step up to that particular plate. So after she left, it became less about real estate and more about which woman could be the meanest one. And so little by little, the show became less enjoyable. And over the seasons, I started noticing a lot of microaggression towards the show's only Black cast member, Chelsea Lazkani. So leading up to season 9, I went back, I looked at some episodes, and I did a TikTok video saying, why I thought that Selling Sunset is a racist show. Just looking from seasons 1 through 8. So right before the season 9 premiere. And because I had been interacting with cast members over the years on and off on Instagram, I shared that video, and I actually got several responses with behind the scenes tea. And the behind the scenes tea that I got leading up to season 9 was this. Number 1, look out for Scary Mary this season. Scary Mary is Mary Bonet's nickname when she's high on cocaine. And the second thing was, since you're talking about racism on the show, apparently there's a scene where Mary and Jason attempted to fire Chelsea. She called them racist, and Jason said cameras off. There was a huge argument, and apparently the ultimate um, place where they wound up was Jason said he would prefer to cancel selling Sunset and selling OC if the production company aired the footage of Chelsea calling him racist. He would rather cancel both shows and have a black woman call him racist in his own office. So as I went through the season, Romaine, at one point during Mary's tirade over Chelsea's flower delivery, said, "That's Scary Mary coming out." And suddenly I had to pause the show, and everything kind of fell into place because Mary was having such an extreme and irrational reaction to a flower delivery that as soon as Romaine said, "Scary Mary is coming out," it occurred to me she's high on cocaine right now. And that explains this erratic behavior, because right after he says that, she yells, "I will commit murder." So the knowledge that Scary Mary is Mary's nickname when she's high on cocaine makes me go back and look at the entire show through a different lens. And throughout the show, Mary has done macroaggressions towards Chelsea Lazkani from the very beginning, because Mary was a part of that conversation with Jason Oppenheim when they went to dinner with Chelsea and her then husband. And she, encouraged that solution that Chelsea, kind of prove her worth by selling a $4+ million house. Now, to put this into context, okay, on the sister show, Selling OC, Jason Oppenheim hired a woman from Nashville to work in the OC office, which is one of the most prestigious zip codes in California, and she didn't have a real estate license. She was unfamiliar with the area. She didn't have a license yet. She was still studying. His interview consisted of asking her for her GPA for undergrad, and then she was hired. Compare that interview to Chelsea Lazkani walking in the door with a master's degree. She's been in California for several years. She has her real estate license and prior real estate experience. And she's married to a wealthy client that Jason already sold a house to. If Chelsea was a white woman, does anyone really believe that she would have had to sell a house to join the brokerage when an unqualified white woman didn't even have to have a license to join the Oppenheim group? So that is a classic example of why Black and brown women, especially in corporate white spaces, say that they have to work twice as hard for half as much. Because just to get a desk, she had to do more than anyone else. And you can tell when she actually sold that house and Jason comes in and says, "A deal's a deal, she's got a spot here." No one was happy for her. Look at Vanessa Villella, who looked furious. Everyone else seemed stunned. And why is it so surprising that a Black woman was able to make that sale? Is it surprising that she's well connected? Why is it surprising? If Emma could have a potential buyer and Vanessa could have a potential buyer, but Chelsea comes in with a buyer whose offer beats theirs, why are you so surprised? That's an invitation to the cast and to anyone listening to start trying to notice the unconscious biases that you have. If you're surprised that a Black person is intelligent or articulate or capable or good at their job, ask yourself why you're surprised. So Chelsea then has a $20 million open house. And during that open house, which is, by the way, in prior seasons, Heather had a $2 million open house. So as far as I can recall, the $20 million open house was the most expensive open house by any of the female brokers. So Chelsea comes in ready to get to work. She has a $20 million open house for a beautiful corner lot in Manhattan Beach. And it's during that open house that Mary encourages Nicole and Chriselle to go and talk about their issue regarding an old deal. Now, remember that open house that I talked about with Heather from a few seasons back? That was the open house where Christine said that Mary was a fucking idiot and Chriselle defended Mary. And on camera, Chriselle says, I find it interesting that Christine would choose to have an argument at an open house. That's so unprofessional. But then again, when has Christine been professional? Fast forward to season 6, Nicole and Chriselle sit down, and the very first thing that Chriselle said was, I heard you were talking shit about, Jason, being so much happier. You're clearly out to get me. Nicole had been friends with Jason at that point for 15 or 16 years. So why was it, quote unquote, out to get Chriselle for Nicole to be happy for him? Everybody was happy that Chriselle was with G. And so when Chriselle started going down that route, Nicole is the one who said, I'm happy to have a professional conversation with you, but let's not take away from the fact that this is Chelsea's client. And at that point, Chriselle starts cursing. She starts raising her voice. Then she calls Nicole a bitch. I will say you're a bitch. You're a fucking bitch. You've been a bitch. You fucking, I don't know what, you don't know what I've fucking been through. And making a scene at a $20 million open house. They're being so loud that from the inside, Chelsea's looking out at the scene that they are creating. And remember, at this point, Chelsea and Chriselle weren't tight. So this is a new colleague to Chriselle. This is a new colleague to Mary Bonet. And then Chriselle gets up and storms through the house saying, I want to have a meeting. I want to have a meeting. And Mary is just very deferential and says, okay, okay, okay. And then Chriselle storms out. And what was Chelsea's response? That was fucking wild. Because why is she bringing potential clients, other agents to a $20 million open house only to have, the manager of the brokerage and another agent, be encouraging another agent to get into a conversation at the wrong place in the wrong time? So that is why I say in that scenario, Nicole was the only person who said, let's keep this professional. This is Chelsea's client. Mary is the manager of a brokerage. Just because this is a reality show doesn't mean that professional events have to devolve into public spectacles. Go look at Owning Manhattan as an example of what a real estate show should look like. So Mary encouraging that conversation and Chriselle escalating it and making it a scene are two examples of what I consider to be microaggressions against Chelsea, because they undermined their colleague at one of her first professional events, and the house was more valuable than any of the houses the two of them had previously sold. Then they're back at the office, and Chelsea rightfully has a bone to pick with Mary about the fact that two agents made a scene. And it's Mary Bonet who more or less tells Chelsea, go sit down. We'll deal with it when Jason gets back. So Mary's issues with Chelsea are fundamentally about being called out for not doing her job well. When Chriselle walked in and was demanding a meeting, Mary just said, yes, okay, 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 okay. But when Chelsea approaches her manager and says, I did not appreciate the fact that this argument was had at a $20 million open house, at that point, Mary could have just stood up and say, guys, quick announcement. Moving forward, let's remember that at open houses, they're professional events, and let's keep private conversations out of, public view when we're doing, an open house. She could have just done that. That would have addressed Chelsea's issue, and then they all could have moved on. But instead, Mary takes offense to that and tells Chelsea to literally go sit down, to the point where when Jason gets back, she doesn't even really raise the fact that Chelsea was upset. She couched it as an issue between Nicole and Chriselle. And Jason, who's the worst boss of all time, and we're going to get to that in part 3 of this intro to the podcast, but he said, I'm not getting involved in between these two ex-girlfriends. So at no point Does the manager of the brokerage or the owner of the brokerage address the concerns of their new Black agent who was embarrassed and who, had a scene caused at a $20 million open house? If they were really taking their real estate business seriously, they would have taken that open house seriously. But this is also, I think, when the show started to devolve and become much less about the real estate and much more about the catty behavior of the women on the show. But the fact that both Jason and Mary failed to address Chelsea's concern are two more examples of microaggressions against Chelsea. Then we have Chelsea's 30th birthday party. That birthday looked like it cost as much as some weddings. It was a really fancy birthday. Chelsea had relatives flown in from all over. And in the middle of that party, there is a scene where Chelsea seems like she's trying to hold Emma back, and Emma brushes her off and literally takes Chelsea's hands off of her. And Emma gaslights Chelsea in that moment. And she says, I love you, I love you. And then she turns around and approaches Nicole to ask the most ridiculous question. Did you call me a social climber? Did you call me a social climber is really the question that's so important that you couldn't wait until, the next day at the office, at a coffee shop, on the boardwalk, on the beach, at something else that wasn't an expensive 30th birthday party of your Black colleague who had family flown in. This wasn't just a reality show. It was a private moment that Chelsea was sharing with the show. And gaslighting is when you tell someone one thing and your actions completely contradict your words. So it's crazy making. So Emma says, I love you to Chelsea, and then immediately goes off on Nicole. And then who joins? Chrishell and then Amanda. So now on a show that's supposed to be about professional women who are grown. This is not, I don't even know, some kind of teenage high school drama. These are grown women talking about, did you call me a social climber? Which is the most benign insult I've ever heard. And given who Emma's boyfriend currently is, I would say, yes, she is a social climber. But that was not the right place and time for that conversation, nor was it the right place and time for Chrishell to be yelling about how much more money she makes, that Nicole rearranged her face. Then Amanda jumps in with, I can't fuck with you after 18 years of friendship because you called Emma, who is a social climber, a social climber. 3 grown women are ganging up on one person. And if you think back to when Christine was still on the show and Chelsea and Christine joined forces on an open house, multiple women ganged up on Christine. And what did Chelsea say back then? That was classless. That was bullying. And the next day, Chelsea was the one to tell them all, listen, next time go to her damn door. But that is not the place to be airing out your business. And they acknowledged back then that Chelsea was right. So how disrespectful is it that Chelsea had already previously pointed out that having, 3 women or 4 women gang up on one at a professional event is unacceptable. But when they are Chelsea's $20 million open house, or when it's Chelsea's, 30th birthday, they have no problem making a spectacle and making those moments about them instead of about her. That is why I say Emma, Chrishell, Mary, Jason, at one point or another on this show have all done microaggressions to Chelsea. Then Chelsea sells a $10 million listing. Jason gives her a challenge, she sells it, and then once the deal falls through, she immediately has a backup. Now, pause right there and think back to when Chrishell first joined. One of her sales fell through for a much cheaper house, and Jason had to chastise her about getting a second offer, a backup offer. So Chelsea, for a $10 million house, is standing on business. She's working her network. She's making sales. She's making a lot of money for the brokerage. And it's in that context then that Jason creates, as executive producer, this quote unquote competition between Mary and Chelsea for this listing in Manhattan Beach. Now, this reality television show is scripted. And what that means is that they plan the scenes, the words that come out of people's mouths are their own, but the scenes are outlined. So they have this quote unquote competition. But for the first time in her whole time on the show, Chelsea shows up to an open house late. They show Mary doing all of the work. Chelsea shows up in an outfit that's, everyone's like she forgot her pants. And then Chrishell and Emma encouraged Chelsea to go outside and climb a Jeep. Now, let me pause right there and ask, does any of that sound like what a boss should be doing to an agent who has clearly become the highest selling female agent in that particular office? If Chelsea were on Owning Manhattan, Ryan Serhant would have said, holy crap, this woman can sell. Let me introduce her to everyone. Like he did with Trisha Lee. For Trisha Lee, who's a Black woman in Ryan Serhant's brokerage, when she proved herself, Ryan introduced her to a huge developer. And when she proved herself with that, Ryan gave her a huge opportunity in Manhattan. And when she proved herself with that, Ryan had a sit-down dinner for his most important agents, and she had a seat at the table. She had an amazing dinner and got a Cartier watch. That is how you treat people you expect to make you millions of dollars. Instead, Jason now is creating scenarios where he has Chelsea competing, and in that competition, now Chelsea's arriving late. I did not see Chrishell and Emma encouraging Mary to go outside and climb a Jeep. So this is another gaslighting moment where they're, I love you. But if Emma and Chrishell really wanted to support Chelsea, they would have said, no, we won't film unless you let us help her set up. We want to show that we're supporting her in this competition. Instead, they played out every Black trope because they had Chelsea late, so Black people are late. They had Chelsea, skimpily dressed, so Black people are over-sexualized. They had her not helping out and leaving to go outside, so Black people are lazy. And yes, Chelsea went along with it, but this is the kind of dilemma that women of color face in a corporate space all of the time. Because sometimes to get a paycheck that you rely on, you have to swallow the disrespect. You have to swallow the microaggressions, and you have to try to stuff it down and keep it moving. But if Jason really cared about making money for his brokerage, as opposed to producing a reality TV show, that scenario between Chelsea and Mary would have never happened. And Mary was unnecessarily aggressive because then in a crowded, packed room, she's choosing that moment to go to Brett and Jason and to have someone talk about Chelsea's wardrobe. And yet none of them want to do it. It's like watching children on the playground figure out, who's going to go up to bat next. Are these men owners of a business that sells hundreds of millions of dollars in real estate, or are they not? You really mean to tell me that Jason and Brett couldn't figure out that the middle of a packed open house was not the place and time to chastise an agent about her wardrobe? What was she supposed to do in that moment? Was she supposed to pull out a pair of trousers from her back pocket? So you're calling her out on camera in a packed place to embarrass her. That is a microaggression that's probably damn near macro at this point because it's being broadcast all over the world. So Mary, Jason, Brett, Chelsea, Chrishell, Emma, all of these people on the show have done some kind of activity that undermined Chelsea on camera. So now we're at season 9, and the realization is that Mary is on cocaine for all of season 9. And she's so high on cocaine that she cannot hide her racial animus. So all those things that I just described before, you can kind of think of a way to pass it off as, being a bad boss, but it has nothing to do with, who she is. But you cannot deny after watching season 9 that Mary Bonet is racist. Anybody receiving flowers on or off camera, if you don't like who they are from, you take a look at the card, you see who they're from, you put the card down. When someone says, "Who's it from?" you say, "It's from that relative I don't like." Let's just, keep moving. But for her to have that specific reaction where she makes her weird coked out face, then she storms outside, yells at production, and then is like, "Oh, it's on camera, it's on camera. How could she do it on camera?" And then she storms past Romaine, and he says, "That's Scary Mary coming out." And then she goes off and says, "I will commit murder." When in the previous 8 seasons has Mary ever said she would commit murder? When in the previous 8 seasons has Mary stormed off camera? Twice. Because then she stormed off at the dinner because she could not fathom the fact that even though they've had their disagreements in the past, that Chelsea could do something just for the sake of being nice. If you have had a colleague that you've disagreed with at work, but something bad happened to them, they got hit by a bus, their kid got sick, their spouse left, their house got robbed, wouldn't you at least chip in to the office gift or send them a little something? The fact that Chelsea sent Mary a little bouquet of flowers should not have devolved into a 3-episode coke-fueled meltdown. And shame on Jason and Selling Sunset because they spent maybe 20 minutes on this woman and her kid whose entire neighborhood was literally reduced to ash. That's how hot those fires were. So the fact that Mary can't put things into perspective and realize that maybe she shouldn't be screaming at the top of her lungs because her Black colleague sent her some flowers when people have literally lost everything, supposedly, they've quote unquote sacrificed salaries to help people during the fires, but I don't even think they make salaries because they're independent contractors. And as Heather previously said, they're 100% on commission. So I wouldn't be surprised if, the idea that they donated their salaries was bullshit. But if Mary were really concerned about the fires, she would not be freaking out over flowers unless she was not in her right frame of mind. And for the first time in TV show history from that Selling Sunset, Jason said cameras off. And Chelsea had to be like, "You don't get to decide that when you get your content. Now it's cameras off." Because Jason did not want the cameras following them outside to capture any more of Mary's coke-fueled meltdown. She was high. They named the entire episode Scary Mary. And everything about that episode shows a woman who's clearly incapacitated and clearly incapable of rational thought. Because then she sees Chelsea's name. Chelsea's miles away. I don't care if the name on the table was an accident or not. Who gives a crap? Just seeing the name, then Mary makes her coked out face again and starts shivering and crying and she's so triggering. It's too much. It's too much. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over. It's too much. It's too much. And so Chelsea isn't even there and becomes the center of attention over Mary's white woman hysteria. Now, the season ends with Mary being like, "Jason, why do I have to leave? I'm gonna leave, but I don't want to leave, and I just want to be happy." And Jason's like, "I want you to be happy too, but I'm gonna leave if I have to leave." And he's like, "I don't want you to leave." And she's like, "Well, someone has to leave." Hint, 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 hint. So the season was supposed to end with Mary and Jason firing Chelsea. But what happened was very similar to what happened at the dinner, which is that Chelsea finally called it out and said that they were being racist. Jason freaked out, said that cameras were going to be off, and then there was a fight. And Jason said, "I would rather cancel Selling Sunset and Selling OC than have a Black woman in my office call me racist." And since the threat was to cancel both shows, people on both shows behind the scenes and in front of the camera heard about this fight. And as someone who's been interacting informally with the cast over the years, when they saw my post talking about why I thought Selling Sunset was racist, multiple people reached out and told me about that now deleted scene. So that's the reason why the Selling Sunset season 9 ended the way that it did. Chriselle Staus is out saying, oh, there was a scene that was never filmed because Mary was frightened. That's not true. Chriselle is out now saying, shame on Mary for saying, she's afraid and that's dangerous rhetoric and do better, girl. But Chriselle has still not said what everyone else can see, which is that Mary Bonet is racist. And this year, it became patently clear because at no time in season 9 has Mary been sober. And if you go back now and look, there are different episodes where you can tell between her mannerisms, between her facial expressions. Some people have been talking about her twitching. You can go back and look and make, a conclusion that Mary has been high on and off. But this season, in my opinion, she just got too overconfident. They all got too overconfident. I think at one point, Chriselle said, I can get away with anything. I could do anything and I'll get away with it. So I think that Mary thought she was good enough to be high on camera, but instead of tiny microaggressions like she had done in last seasons, all her microaggressions became macro and over the top to the point where a flower delivery took 3 episodes. It didn't even take 3 episodes when Christine Quinn sent Heather a 15-foot flower arrangement outside her bridal party. And people will say, well, Mary was upset about the robbery, but 99% of the public thinks that robbery was insurance fraud. So what is really happening? Scary Mary is Mary Bonet's nickname when she is high on cocaine. And she and Amanza have been friends for 24 years, which is another podcast episode coming up. But Amanza has now gone on the record and said that for nearly that amount of time, she's been struggling with drug issues. So since they've been best friends, and since Scary Mary is high often enough that her friends and her inner circle have a nickname, it stands to reason that Mary has been on drugs for a very long time. Now, as I said in my previous podcast episode, okay, if we were in a civil trial, the burden of proof is called a preponderance of the evidence. All it means is that you have to be over 50-50. If there's a 51% chance of something being true, you win. So you tell me, given all the evidence, okay, all of the microaggressions that Mary had done over the years escalated in season 9. For the first time, she couldn't hide because drugs like alcohol, like sleep deprivation, mess with the chemical balances of your brain, and people are more likely to be truthful in altered states. So she's been hinting at her racism, and this season, her drug use made it plain. To the point where she stormed off camera twice. Jason said cameras off twice, but only one of those instances made it to air because he threatened to cancel Selling Sunset and Selling OC if the production company aired footage of Chelsea Lazkani calling the two of them racist. So that, my dear friends, is the end of the second part of the Selling Sanity podcast debut. Stay tuned for part 3, which is Jason Oppenheim is a PIMP. Thanks for listening.